right, this Cwic Media episode is an introduction to the Book of Mormon. This is not part of the Come Follow Me curriculum, but I thought it would be important to start off with some context, really understanding how the Book of Mormon is launched, what is in the heads of Lehi and Nephi as they begin to write and to preach. Where is this coming from? So we want to back up a little bit and do a very quick little rehearsal of Israelite history. Remember that when Moses brought the 12 tribes out of Egypt, and then Joshua ended up bringing them into Palestine, that they divided up the lands into these different tribes, the 12 different tribes. Now it worked a little bit differently because the Levites, the tribe of Levi, was not given any land. So there were 11 tribes left. They were just given places among different cities around Israel to act as the priests. Well, to make up for that, what they did is they gave the tribe, an additional tribe to Joseph. And so that the two tribes, the additional tribe now, the tribe of Joseph was now made two tribes under Ephraim and Manasseh. Now Manasseh was actually the older of the two sons of Joseph, but the birthright was given to Ephraim. And they are mostly up in the northern parts of the kingdom of Israel. And so they go through a period of judges, and then they finally are brought together in a united kingdom under King Saul. And then Saul passes away, and then you have David, right? And then after David, you have Solomon. Well, that's as far as things got in terms of a unified Israel. It was just under those three kings. What happens is that toward the end of Solomon's reign, at least by then, he had laid on a very heavy tax to the other tribes. And they were not happy about what was going on. They were not happy at all with Solomon. Well, Solomon's son, Rehoboam, takes over the throne after Solomon passes away. And there was a man in the king's court named Jeroboam. Now, Jeroboam was an Ephraimite. He was from the tribe of Ephraim. And he had been put in this high position of administration and had gone around all of Israel, had his ear to the ground. He knew what the issues were. And so he had kind of advocated after that with the son of Solomon, Rehoboam, to lower the taxes on the people. Well, Rehoboam wouldn't do it. The new king of Judah wouldn't do that. And so what happens is Jeroboam ends up going into exile down into Egypt. Of course, strong relationship with Egypt. And eventually comes back with some others. In the meantime, he's gotten married down there. He is married, actually, according to the Septuagint, he's married to an Egyptian princess. And he comes back with an entourage advocating again for lowering the taxes. Rehoboam is not going to lower the taxes. And so Jeroboam unites most of the other tribes, in fact, almost all of them outside of Judah, and starts a new kingdom that breaks off, which is the majority of the Israelites, the vast majority of the Israelites. And that new kingdom has a few different names. One is just the northern kingdom, and Judah, where Jerusalem is, becomes the southern kingdom. And Jeroboam is made king of the northern kingdom, also called Ephraim, also called the kingdom of Israel. And there is a very conflicted history between these two kingdoms. A lot of bloodshed that goes on between the two of them. But Rehoboam of Judah, the southern kingdom, is never able to bring the northern kingdom under his reign again. Well, what happens in the northern kingdom is that their theology changes even a little bit. Jeroboam did not want all of the Israelites to continue to go down to the temple in Jerusalem. So he sets up a sanctuary in the southern part of Ephraim, in the southern part of the northern kingdom, in Bethel. And that's where they have a golden calf there as well. And then up in the north, way north in the tribe of Dan's land territory there, he sets up another sanctuary and another golden calf. So their theology is a little bit different. It changes a little bit, but they actually do hold on to a lot of the Torah and a lot of the teachings of the prophets. So we have now these two lands that have split apart. Well, Lehi's tribe, Manasseh, is in the northern kingdom. Now there is Benjamin, which is the land is right next to Judah's land. They end up siding with Judah, and they stay with them. And that's kind of how you get like the two tribes that are together here. There's a few others, a lot of, especially of Simeon and some other tribes, that you've got some of their people still here, some of the Levites as priests, etc. But basically it's those two tribes, Judah and Benjamin, and the other 10 are in the northern kingdom. There was also a time in the latter half of the 9th century BC where under King Asa of the southern kingdom, he had been a righteous king, and there were a number of defectors from the lands of Ephraim, Manasseh, and of Simeon. And so they came down into the kingdom of Judah kind of as spiritual refugees to be under a king that they felt was doing things right in the temple and in their theology. It's another chance where Lehi's family may have come down. Well, eventually what happens is that the Assyrians to the east start gaining a lot of power and dominance over the Middle East. And they come in with the beckoning of Rehoboam, the Judah's king, who pays Assyria a tribute. They come in and they battle with the northern kingdom, and they end up taking a few of the territories. One of them is a portion of Manasseh. At this time, there were several refugees that moved into other lands and even moved down into Judah. That's a possibility, perhaps, of where Lehi's family may have come from and why he ended up in the land of Jerusalem. Well, only about 10 years later, in about 721, 722 BC, the Assyrians come in and they completely conquer the northern kingdom. And that's where we get the lost 10 tribes. Right? Those 10 tribes are scattered. Now, there's only actually a portion of the northern kingdom, the people of the northern kingdom, that are taken out. They're exiled out of the land. They're put into other lands, and other peoples from the Assyrian Empire are brought in to the land of the northern kingdom. Well, at this time, there's also refugees from the northern kingdom that end up coming down into the land of Judah. And we can read about these events that had to do with the tribe of Manasseh in 2 Chronicles in a couple of different places. So plenty of opportunities for Lehi's ancestors to have come down into the land of Judah. And so after the Assyrians had removed a number of the members of the northern kingdom and brought in others from other city-states into the northern kingdom, plus a number of Assyrians coming into the northern kingdom, you had a mix here of Israelites and foreigners and Assyrians in the northern kingdom. Well, by this point, the capital of the northern kingdom is Samaria. These become the Samaritans of Jesus' time. In fact, Samaria is south of Galilee and Nazareth, and between Nazareth and Jerusalem. So through various events, there is a mixing of the pot again down in Jerusalem in the kingdom of Judah. A little bit later, a couple decades later, after the Assyrians come in and wipe out the northern kingdom, so to speak, they go after Jerusalem. And this is where Isaiah is at the time, right? This is more around 700-ish, a little before 700 BC. Now, they lose a lot of the territory, but they're able to hold off in Jerusalem, right? We're not going to go into that story right now, but they're able to hold off. And that's where Isaiah is. And so they're going through a lot of tumultuous time here. And there are a number of changes that happen eventually with one of the kings that is there with Isaiah, whose name is Hezekiah. And there are reforms in the temple, and actually things taken out of the temple at that time. There's a lot of change. But what we can see here is that something very similar to what we're going to see in the Book of Mormon. And I think it's why Isaiah is so well liked in the Book of Mormon by Nephi and others, because it's a very similar situation. It looks like the doctrine of the Son of God, the doctrine of Christ, was under attack. And Isaiah is there as the prophet, as a messianic prophet, to fight against this. And I believe that's what he was doing. And so we get all of these quotations in the New Testament from Isaiah, because the writers of the New Testament are reaching back to Isaiah, who is reacting to his own time period and putting in the narrative and the testimony and the support for the doctrine of Christ. And of course, in the Book of Mormon, it's everywhere. The whole Book of Mormon is built around Isaiah. And if you haven't read any of the works of Joseph Spencer, you ought to read his books this year. A couple of them are a little more technical and a little tough, but he does a fabulous job of showing how the Book of Mormon is written around the book of Isaiah. Now, we're going to get down to the time of Lehi and Nephi here, about 100 years later, and show why they're in the same situation. In 621, 622 BC, there is a king named Josiah in Jerusalem. Now, we go back to the Old Testament and we read about King Josiah, and we see everything is very positive about him. And maybe it was. Maybe it was. But we need to take some things into consideration at this time, because we're getting into Lehi's period here of time, and look a little bit closer to see what's really going on. We get the clarification from the Book of Mormon. That's the job of the Book of Mormon, is to help clarify the Bible. So at 621, 622 BC, there are massive reforms from King Josiah in the temple. And he wipes out a lot of the high places. You've probably read about that or had a lesson on that. He centralizes the priesthood and worship. He kills off a bunch of priests so that all the control, the theocratic control, ends up in his hands, basically, and under him in Jerusalem. Now, a couple of things about him. His father was assassinated, and King Josiah became basically a puppet king to the court, because he was put in when he was 8 years old. And so he's not really ruling a whole lot at that point. But somebody is, or several people are, somewhere. And eventually, when he is 26, so 18 years later, there is a book supposedly found in the temple. We're not really sure how to interpret this, because it's very odd. There are a number of discrepancies in the account about fixing the temple and when that actually happened. What was the book? A lot of biblical scholars believe it was the book of Deuteronomy, or a new portion of the book of Deuteronomy, or a revised book of the book of Deuteronomy. Some very strange things happen here. And when that book comes out, all of a sudden, there's widespread change in the religion and the practice and the sacrifices. And the temple itself is changed. And it's all done under the name of Yahweh. It's all done in a way that says, look, what we're really doing here is we're getting rid of idol worship. Well, that might be true, that there was idol worship that was being removed, but we need to consider a couple things here with idol worship. First of all, apparently, what they are doing is they are trying to be extremists in their monotheism. In other words, it is Yahweh to begin with, Yahweh in the end. All is Yahweh. There is no worship of anybody else. There is no other God, right? And in what they're saying there is no Father, there is no Son, there is no Mother in heaven. There's nobody else in heaven. There are no hosts of heaven. The heavenly hosts are taken out. So what they do, this theocratic party are called the Deuteronomists. And they basically take theocratic power at this point. And they're the ones responsible really for a lot of the books in the Old Testament, at least the resulting books, the way that they're written in the New Testament, or in the Old Testament. And they basically shrink the hierarchy in heaven down to nothing. There is no longer a hierarchy in heaven. It is just one single God, and his name is Yahweh. Well, think about the temple drama. What would have to change with the temple drama? Quite a bit. Because there was a son that was born and that was gone into the Holy of Holies, sat on the throne, born coming out of the veil, acted as Yahweh, as Jehovah. But he was the son. And there was a mom and there was a father who was El or Elohim. So you have to change everything if you're going to do that. And some of those things are represented in the temple or in that temple drama. The hosts of heaven. Now, we look at that today, and if we just take a very cursory look at the hosts of heaven, we can think of more of something like the myths of Greece and Rome, right? Where there's heavenly or star-like gods and goddesses that are being worshipped. And that could very well be the case, right? It could be that was part of a problem. But it also means that if you're going to, it's like us saying today, there should be no other gods before him, before God, and then getting rid of Jesus Christ and getting rid of a heavenly mother that might exist and getting rid of any of the angels in a hierarchy that are in heaven. There is nothing there, right? What does that do? That takes away the pre-existence. That takes away a lot of what we're looking at as far as who we are and who we can become. And it's all centered in the doctrine of Christ. You don't have a father and you don't have a son. Well, there's no son of God, right? You've changed everything. And that appears to me, anyway, to be what has happened here with the Deuteronomists. They have flattened the hierarchy in heaven. They have changed the temple. They have changed the temple drama and even its imagery. They got rid of some things in the temple that would have represented individuals in heaven. So this is just about 24, 25 years before Lehi leaves Jerusalem. And then we have that 24, 25 years and whatever happened during that period of time where there's a succession of kings after Josiah. He reigns for 30 years or so. Now, something to realize that's important at this time is the political makeup and the power game that is going on in the Middle East. The Assyrians have lost power by this time. They have lost almost all of their power. And what has risen is Babylon, and especially now under King Nebuchadnezzar. And Babylon is now basically taking tribute from the land of Judah, from Jerusalem. And they've got their own puppet king in there. And then they change them out, and they change them out. Some flee to Egypt. Well, what happens is the majority of the people do not want to side with Babylon. They want to betray Babylon and King Nebuchadnezzar, and they want to align themselves with Egypt. Now, it used to be thought that was just ridiculous. But the truth is that there were a lot of strong ties between Egypt and Jerusalem, the land of Judah. The Egyptians had brought in a lot of people when they had basically had Palestine as a vassal state previous to this. A lot of the accounting that we see and business transactions and documents from those things that we see in this time period were actually written in Egyptian. And so the people had a stronger affinity over to Egypt than they did over to Babylon. Well, finally, one of the sons of King Josiah, being King Zedekiah, is put into the throne. And he's there in his first year. And this is the environment that they're in, this political triangle between Jerusalem, Babylon, and Egypt. And then this crushing of the doctrine of Christ in their theocracy and in the temple. And here's Lehi. Now, we don't know much about Lehi and what his background is, but there's some things to consider there. He's from Manasseh. At some point, it sounds like his ancestors came down, or maybe he did. But at some point, his family had moved down into the land of Jerusalem. And we don't know if he was really on board with what he eventually gets on board with the doctrine of Christ. We don't know where he's at spiritually earlier in his life with Sarah. He may have bought into the whole thing with the Deuteronomists. He may have been a lower law kind of guy at first. And it was all about Moses and all about the law of Moses and the Torah. And doctrine of Christ is something that is a blasphemy thing. And they're not going to have any part of it. We don't know. It may not be until the very beginning of the Book of Mormon where we see he has his vision and that he ends up changing. Right? That's a possibility. Now, he is contemporary to Jeremiah, who is in Jerusalem at this time. And the interesting thing about the book of Jeremiah is a lot of biblical scholars will say that that was written by the Deuteronomists, or at least that there are several elements that look like they were edited by the Deuteronomists, and they have changed things. But here's some things that we do know that are in the book of Jeremiah. There are people in the temple that are fighting against Jeremiah. So Jeremiah the prophet is in direct conflict with several people here in the temple. He is fighting off false prophets all the time. Those that are in Babylon at the time, when they get taken out to Babylon, and Babylon has not yet conquered Jerusalem, but they have taken some of the court. Maybe Daniel, for example, maybe Ezekiel. But Jeremiah is fighting off these false prophets. He hammers the priests, several of the priests. He fights against local prophets and what they're prophesying about, that there is peace and not to worry about things. And, oh, go ahead, you can go with the Egyptians and everything will be dandy. No problems there. And so he's fighting all of these things off. It seems like with his preaching all around him, he is surrounded by people that are against him. And again, that is the environment, the theocratic environment that he is in. It is not just an evil place, right? When we talk about Lehi and Nephi and they're looking back at Jerusalem and it's going to be destroyed, it's not just because it's an evil place and they're doing bad. That's, of course, a big part of it. But they are in an environment in Jerusalem where they have crushed the doctrine of Christ. It's gone. It is a whisper. It is a shadow, right? Now, of course, there would have been a number of people that would have held on to things. They're not just going to give it up. But not in Jerusalem. Right? You're pushed out if you're going to believe in the older ways. You're pushed out if you believe in the things that Isaiah was talking about. So that's where Jeremiah is, and that's what's happening in Jerusalem. And that is what we need to understand as we start off with the Book of Mormon. Just as Isaiah was in an environment that was fighting against the doctrine of Christ, and he was sticking up for it left and right, and warning the people, and preaching about Christ, about the Son of God, the suffering servant. That's what Lehi is doing. And we're going to cover that. You're going to see that right from chapter 1. You're going to see a prophet, a man that is fighting for his life and that is fighting for the doctrine of Christ. He's not just preaching repentance. That's not the way to look at this. We want to see why he's leaving. Why is he going to be killed like all the other prophets? What were they preaching about? Why do his own sons, Laman and Lemuel, despise him and want to kill him? It's not just a power play. It's a theocratic issue that Nephi is bringing us into. This is how things are in Jerusalem. We are leaving all of this. We are starting something new where we can make sure that not only Lehi saves his life from those that want to kill him, but that we could start a civilization built on the doctrine of Christ. That's the Book of Mormon. We're going to see this in the interplay between the brothers. We're going to see this in the vision of Lehi in his very first vision in chapter 1, where he sees the Son of God and he sees the hosts of heaven, like we already spoke about. This is immediately, Nephi is putting this out there to let us know that this is a refuting what has happened and transpired in Jerusalem. We're going to see this in Lehi's dream, in his vision of the tree of life. You're going to see it completely differently. We're going to see this with King Benjamin when he gives his speech at the coronation of his son Mosiah. We're going to see this with Abinadi and King Noah and those priests. The fight between those that would hold on to the doctrine of Christ and those that want to push it away. We're going to see it with the antichrists of Korihor and Sherem and Nehor. What Lehi and Nephi do is build an entire legacy of people built on the doctrine of Christ. They have seen what happens when you remove that. They have seen the corruption of the church and the corruption of the temple. And as they pass on the records to Jacob and then to Enos and Omni and Jerem and then all the way down the road here, there is a legacy that is built on the doctrine of Christ. And they can always reach back and pull back with an understanding of how they are being contrasted against Jerusalem and what the condition that Jerusalem is in. There are many copies of the chapters of Isaiah throughout the Book of Mormon. Why? There is a focus on Isaiah and chapter 52, verses 7 to 10, in the whole struggle with Abinadi and King Noah and his priests. Why? This is all about Jesus Christ. The whole book is written on this. And therefore, what is it doing for us? We can see the words Jesus and Christ throughout the Book of Mormon. We don't see that in the Old Testament. Again, why? How is it that they have this deep knowledge of these things, and yet we can't extract that out of the Old Testament? Not precisely, only by implication, right? We can infer several things from Isaiah and all of the prophets, and we can tie them to prophecy, and that's what the New Testament writers do. But specific clarification on the Son of God, on Jehovah as the suffering servant, of Jesus Christ, is not in the Old Testament. That is why we have the Book of Mormon, because it is a check on the Old Testament and on the New Testament. When we talk about the Book of Mormon and its subtitle, Another Testament of Jesus Christ, The entire book is written on that. And the Bible was too originally, right? And still in a sense is, but it has had many errors, editing errors, translation errors, and probably a lot of changes that were there on purpose. Well, we know that. We know there are several changes in the Bible, especially the Old Testament. So as we get ready here for the Book of Mormon and go through it, I know that as we go through this series, you're going to have a completely different view of this book, of its focus, of what it's trying to teach you and me. And you're going to see it in a different way. We're going to apply the four interpreters of the higher and the lower laws. We're going to have the temple imagery and drama. We're going to have authorship and the Nehor principle. And you're going to see how those all play out throughout this book. You'll see the characters of the Book of Mormon in a different light and understand where they're coming from. And you'll see the importance of the book in our day as it fights with everything it's got to protect and uphold and preach about the doctrine of Christ. I'll talk to you next time.